bringing the people behind our food to life.
Tomato pie is a southern recipe. It's actually a recipe that's been in my family for all my life. So first we start with onions. These are Walla Walla sweet onions, and I usually just chop them up in smaller pieces to caramelize them. And once they're caramelized, they'll be added to the top of the tomato pie. So I like to start this first, just because it takes a little longer to do. Traditionally, southern tomato pie has actually been, it's served with fresh seafood. Shrimp is a great accompaniment to it, and as well as crab, boiled crab, any type of seafood. So that's about 1.5 cups of onions, and now we're going to go caramelize them. So I have my butter melting here. I used about 2 tablespoons, and I'm going to make enough onions for 2 pies. So what we're going to do is just keep this at medium-low, and it takes about 30 minutes for the onions to caramelize. We don't want to burn them, we don't want to stir fry them. We just want to let them break down, let the sugars break down in the onion. Gives it that sweet flavor. So these will take a little while. What I'm going to do is actually start on the tomatoes. And I have the tomatoes here. I also have some water that's almost to a boil. What I'm going to do actually is take the tomato and make a crisscross right on the bottom with the knife so that the peeling will be much easier. And I'll just place them right in the hot bath. These are some gorgeous tomatoes right here from the Northwest. And we don't want them to stay too long in the water. We want them to heat up just a minute, but we don't want them to cook. So you leave them, let's say 10, 15, 20 seconds maybe. It just heats the outside so that the peel comes off a little easier, and they're done. Oh, and they're heavy. They're very large, which is nice. And you can almost see those peels already coming off. So we'll take these back to the table and peel them. So now that they've had the hot water bath, what I do is actually peel the tomatoes. And sometimes I just cut the edges off as well. Make sure that they have cooled down just a little bit, because this can be a little bit painful if they're too hot. So what we're going after is the meat of the tomato. I got these tomatoes at the farmer's market, and I happened to be going by there yesterday and decided to check in, and they had some gorgeous heirloom tomatoes. So I decided to pick some up. Now that our tomatoes are peeled, we're going to do a little bit of draining. And I usually just get some strainers and have a pan underneath them. But I also cut up the tomatoes just a bit. I like to get them cut flat so I can put them on an even surface to cut. I get them in these chunks, and then I just put them in strainers. And you want to strain them for about 30 minutes, maybe 20. Just to get some of those juices out. Squeeze out a lot of the juices in the tomatoes, because the pie crust at the bottom becomes a little bit soggy if we don't. So you want to get them in somewhat bite-sized chunks. That way people can eat the pie without pulling a full slice of tomato out of the pie. I even squeeze them just a little bit when I put them in the strainer to get some more of the juice out. You just want the meat of the tomato. The one thing I like about tomato pie is that at the end of the season, if you're you happen to grow tomatoes in your garden, you know that a lot of times you get quite a few tomatoes at the end of the summer, and if you like canning them, that's a really good way to preserve them. Some people like to do that. I'm one of those that doesn't know a whole lot about canning, but these pies freeze really well, so that's another way to preserve them throughout the winter. So now we're going to make the cheese filling. Here I have some shredded medium cheddar cheese, and you can either buy it pre-shredded or you can shred it yourself. That is a cup and a half of the shredded cheese. I also add a half a cup of mayo to that for the filling. In addition to that, I'll add some fresh cracked pepper. We just ground this earlier. And just probably about a quarter teaspoon, just a little bit. And this is easily mixed up, but I tend to use my hands because really I don't measure this a lot of the time. I like to go by consistency. So when you mix it with your hands, you want it to be a little bit mayonnaise-y. I'm thinking it might need just a little bit more cheese. So we'll say about 2 cups. And what the mayonnaise is going to do actually to the cheese is make it just a little fluffy. And you just want it to be able to hold the cheese together. And now you have your cheese filling already ready to go. Looks like our onions are perfect. They've broken down nicely. So we're just going to go ahead and take them back. So the next step, we're first going to par bake the crust a little bit, about 10 minutes in a 425-degree oven. What this does is it solidifies the crust in the beginning in order to make it a little bit crunchy or crispy. So now we're going to assemble the crust, and the pie. And basically what we do is we fill the pie crust with the tomatoes that have been draining. Just want to spread out an even layer of the tomatoes on the bottom. Start there. And then we add basil, dried basil. It holds up a little bit better than fresh basil in the oven. And I really just eyeball this. I just sprinkle a little bit on. We do a little bit of natural raw sugar. Like I said, just sprinkle a little bit on. Do a little cracked pepper, and then a little kosher salt. That just gives the tomatoes a little flavor. And then what we'll do is finish up with the rest of the tomatoes on top of that. If you can use multiple colors of tomatoes, it always is beautiful cutting into it. The best thing about this recipe is that you can make it your own. You can use all different types of herbs, spices, cheeses. Don't be afraid to try things out. Okay, so that's enough tomatoes. The next step is I'm actually going to add just a little bit more of the basil, sugar, salt, and pepper. And I'm just saying a little bit here, just to give it a little more flavor. All right. So the next step is actually to take our cheese mixture and spread that over the top. I tend to use my fingers with this because you can spread it out a little bit better, a little flatter. And one thing I like to do too is to kind of keep some of the tomatoes visible. It's a nice contrast to the cheese mixture. So the next step is to use a little bit of seasoning. I have my own blend that I use. Mine is made with just some herbs. I think there's some dried carrot, some dried garlic. If you like garlic, this is a great time to put on some. You could do roasted garlic, you could do dried garlic, you could even do fresh garlic. So I just have my own little seasoning blend. I know certain folks, friends of mine, actually do rosemary. There's herbs de Provence are really good. This is where you sort of make it your own flavor. Okay, now that that's done, we'll add the caramelized onions. Don't skimp on the onions unless you're not an onion fan, because they tend to be one of the best parts. They really give it a good sweetness. So this is going to go into the oven for about 30 minutes at 350. What you really want to do is just cook down the tomatoes a little bit, make sure the cheese melts. And then once we're done, we usually put a little sprig of basil on top as a garnish. But otherwise, we're finished with the pie.